This is the Faith in Real Life podcast with author and pastor Nat Crawford and co-lead pastor Dan Koch. Let's tackle real issues in the culture and in life with the truths of Scripture. And now here's Nat and Dan.
Welcome to the Faith in Real Life podcast. I'm your host, pastor and Bible teacher Nat Crawford, and I am here with my special guest, Dr. Gary Chapman. Dr. Chapman is an internationally known author. He's a speaker, counselor, and pastor. He is an internationally recognized marriage counselor and director of many marriage seminars, even in Canada, I've been informed. So this guy is global. He wrote The 5 Love Languages, and it is by far one of his most popular titles. In fact, it's one of my favorites. And his book, The 5 Love Languages, has been translated into over 50 languages and sold, last I've heard, over 11 million copies. It's probably 20 million by now, but those are old numbers I'm running. So, Dr. Chapman, it is a pleasure to have you on the program today.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you.
To have you back on the program. When I last had you on my program, it was with Back to the Bible. And now I'm pastoring full time. And so one of the books I always refer people to, The 5 Love Languages, when it comes to marriage and counseling. You wrote this book, and I want you to see, like, this book, all use, we have to hold it rubber bands, other tools, because, other than the Bible, I can't think of a book that I use and prescribe for couples today who, want to start off a marriage well, or who are in a place where they have a love deficit. And this book, I'm not trying to over-exaggerate, Dr. Chapman, it actually really changed our marriage. Early on in our marriage, my wife and I have been married for 21 years, and the first year to 2 years were supposed to be wedded bliss, and they were exhausting, draining, and everything that you don't expect it to be. We were loving each other, but our love tanks were not being filled and refilled, and it drove us crazy. And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this. I think how we were trying to go about marriage, it almost bankrupted our marriage. And so when we got a hold of this book, we read it and we applied it, and our marriage has been forever changed. So first of all, thank you for what you've done in the field of marriage and with Christians and non-Christians around the globe. So let me just quit embarrassing you, and let me just begin by asking you this question. What makes this book, The 5 Love Languages, different or stand out from all the other relationship books out there?
I think 2 or 3 things. One, it's simple to understand. Many books on marriage and family have so many psychological terms that people don't understand, and they kind of turn them off. It's easy to understand. Anybody can grasp the idea that there's 5 basic ways to express love on an emotional level, and that what makes one spouse feel love doesn't make another spouse feel love.
True.
So if you want to meet each other's need for love, you've got to learn how to speak each other's language. It's a simple concept. But I think because it is simple, and the other reason is because almost everyone agrees one of our deepest emotional needs on the human level is the need to feel loved by the significant people in our lives. And this book helps you accomplish that. And I think all of us want that. It's just we don't know how to do it. And this book helps you know how to do it.
Yeah, you think that loving your spouse would be the easiest thing on earth, and it really isn't. But there's something you said in your book, and that you've said that is a thought-provoking statement. You say that, we are influenced, not controlled by our personalities. And I thought, whoa. Personalities are fixed, but so what does that mean? We're not controlled, but we're influenced by them. What do you mean by that?
Well, for example, when it comes to talking, there are what I call dead seas. They receive all kinds of things, but they have no compulsion to talk, no compulsion to share. And then there's personalities that I call babbling brooks. Everything that comes in the eye gate or the ear gate comes out the mouth gate. And these people usually marry each other. And so what I say is this: we cannot change our spouse. I think everybody agrees with it. You can't make your spouse change to fit your whatever it is. But you can influence your spouse and whatever their personality. And when it comes to love, if you learn their primary love language and you choose to speak it, even if you don't feel loved by them, but you choose to speak their language, you touch them emotionally, and it draws them to you. It's the same principle, you know, the Bible says we love God because God first loved us. And so the same principle is true in human relationships.
Yep.
And so with our personalities, yes, we are influenced by our personalities, but we are not controlled by our personality. We don't have to be locked into that. I, for example, I by nature am not an outgoing person. I'm an introvert. My wife is a very outgoing person, an extrovert. But I have learned how to be more open to people, initiate conversations just on the streets and highways and everywhere. I've become more, lean more in that direction. Mm. So again, we are something by nature, but it doesn't mean we can't overcome the weaknesses, because every personality has strengths and weaknesses. What we want to do is try to overcome the weaknesses and enjoy the strengths.
Wow, that's really great. Yeah, one of the things I often tell people is personality may be fixed, but behavior is a choice, right? We have a
That's right.
choice in how we behave. And, my wife and I, it's interesting, we are both high extroverts, but I tend to be the Dead Sea in the conversation, and she's the baffling brook, right? So, like, is there a way to shut this thing off? And she's like, is there a way to turn this thing on?
That's right.
Yeah, but it does, what you do learn over time is how to manage yourself well and how to respond in those situations, because when you're aware of what your spouse or whoever, this book applies to other relationships, of course,
yeah.
But when you actually learn to be more aware of what the person is needing, and then you can begin to provide them in those moments. So I think that's really good, influence versus control, and how helpful it is to just be reminded that you can control your spouse. Now, we all know that, but none of us believes in practice. So it's easy to know, hard to put into practice. So let's talk about the 5 love languages. So in your book, you write about 5. How did you discover these, first of all? Because once you read it, you're like, well, duh. That's obvious.
Yeah. Well, I remember years ago, the first time it dawned on me that what makes one person feel loved doesn't make another person feel loved. The couple sat down. I didn't know them. I found out later they'd been married to each other for 30 years. And she said, bottom line, she said, Dr. Chapman, here's the problem. She said, we don't argue with each other, and we don't have any money problems. And she mentioned some other positive things. She said, but I just don't feel any love coming from him. She said, it's just, we're like roommates, but I don't feel any love coming from him. And I looked at her husband, and he said, I don't understand her. I do everything I can to show her that I love her. And I said, well, what do you do? He said, well, I get home from work before she does, so I start the evening meal. Sometimes I have it ready for when she gets home. If not, she'll help me. After that, I wash the dishes every night. And on Thursday night, I vacuum the floors. And every Saturday, I wash the car, I mow the grass, I help her with the laundry. And he went on. I was beginning to wonder, what did this woman do? It sounded like he was doing everything.
Yep.
And when I look back at her, she said, Dr. Chapman, he's right. He's a hard-working man. But we don't ever talk. We haven't talked in 20 years. She said, he's always washing the dishes, vacuuming the floors, but he's always doing something. And I realized here was a sincere husband who was doing everything he knew to do to show his wife that he loved her, and he wasn't connecting with her emotionally. And after that, I heard similar stories over and over. So eventually I thought, there's got to be a pattern to this. So what I did eventually was to sit down and read several years of notes that I made when I was counseling, and ask myself the question, when someone said, I don't feel love coming from my spouse, what were they complaining about? What did they want? And it fell into 5 categories. And I later called them the 5 love languages and started using it in my counseling. If you want her to feel loved, you got to learn her language. You want him to feel loved, you got to learn his language. And sometimes I know it helped them discover each other's language and then challenge them to go home and try it. And sometimes they'd come back in 3 weeks and say, Gary, this is really changing things.
Absolutely.
The whole climate's getting different now. And so that's where it came from.
Wow, that's incredible. So what are the 5 love languages?
One of them is words of affirmation. You look nice in that outfit. I really appreciate what you did. You know, one of the things I like about you is just you verbalizing things that you genuinely appreciate about them. And, you know, there's an Old Testament proverb that says life and death is in the power of the tongue. You can actually kill a relationship by giving negative words, condemning words. And you can give life to that person if you give positive words. I didn't have a lady say, well, Gary, I hear that, and I know that would be nice. She said, but to be honest with you, I can't think of anything good to say about my husband. I said, does he ever take a shower? She said, well, yes. I said, well, how often? She said, well, every day. I said, well, if I were you, I'd start there. I said, there are men who don't take showers.
Right. you know, as we talk and listen to you, kind of remind me of Zig Ziglar a little bit. Maybe the accent, but also it's that positive motivation on things. I like that. That's right.
I said, because it's words, and then there's acts of service, doing something for your spouse that you know they would like for you to do. That's the language the gentleman we just talked about was speaking. He was doing acts of service and doing it really well. It's just that it wasn't her language. But, you know, the old saying is, actions speak louder than words. Well, if this is your love language, that's true. It's not true for everyone. But if your language is acts of service, then that will speak loud. And then there's gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. The gift says, they were thinking about me. Look what they got from me. And I like to emphasize, the gift doesn't have to be expensive. You know, we've always said it's the thought that counts. But I remind couples, it's not the thought left in your head that counts. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head, okay? And for some people, this is their language. And it doesn't have to be. It can be just a flower you picked in the yard. And say, honey, I saw this in the backyard. I just wanted to give it to you. And, well, honey, that's so sweet of you. I had a man say to me not long ago, he said, no, tell me, my wife's language is gifts. I was taking a walk one morning, and I saw a bird feather. And I picked it up and brushed it off. And when I got home, I said, honey, when I was walking today, I found this bird feather, and I want to give it to you because it reminded me that you are the wind beneath my wings. And she said, oh, that is so sweet. He gave her a gift and words of affirmation.
I'm going to steal that one. I'm writing that one down for when I go home today.
Go out and find a feather. And then there's quality time. Giving the other person your undivided attention. And that's what the lady was crying for when she said, we don't ever talk. She didn't mean they didn't discuss logistics, you know, which restaurant you want to go to or who's going to take the kids to school. She meant we don't ever sit down and share our hearts with each other and share with each other what's going on in our lives. And she said, because she said, I just feel like I don't even know him. So she was crying for quality time. And then there's physical touch. And we've long known the emotional power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies, hold them, kiss them, and cuddle them. And long before the baby understands the meaning of the word love, the baby feels love by physical touch. So those are the 5 languages, and basic concept, as we've discussed, is that each of us has a primary love language. One of those speaks more deeply to us than the others. We can receive love in all of them. They're all fine. There's nothing wrong with any one of them. But if the person doesn't speak our primary language, we will not feel loved, even though they're expressing their love in some of the other languages.
Yeah, and I think that's really, really true. I think that's what was our biggest issue is my primary love language is acts of service. So much like that gentleman, I mean, early on in our marriage, I was cooking, I was cleaning, I was doing laundry, all these things. And my wife just didn't feel loved. She goes, I just don't feel loved by you. And I'm like, baby, you got a perfect husband. Like you got everything right here on a platter. And she goes, but I just want to spend time with you. And to tell you how dense I am, and I'm a little embarrassed by this, but it is a true story. I remember she said, I just want to spend time with you. And I thought, I got it. I'm going to have a party this week. We're going to invite all these people over. We're going to be together. And she just goes, you really are stupid. Like, I don't know. But it was, again, once we began reading this book, we go, okay, whoa. So your love language is this, and it's not mine, and vice versa. So I'm curious, from your perspective in counseling thousands and thousands of people, is it typical that spouses will have different love languages, primary love languages?
Yeah, almost always. It is the exception. Some people do have the same language, but it's the exception. But even if they have the same language, they will likely have different dialects of that language.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Different ways of expressing it. For example, a lady said to me, she said, my husband and I have the same love language. I said, wonderful. What is it? She said, acts of service. But, she said, the things I want him to do for me to make me feel loved are different from the things he wants me to do to make him feel loved. Same language, just different ways of expressing it, different things, Like for one person, it might be washing dishes, might be really, really meaningful. For others, the dialect might be if you vacuum the floors or something else, So it's finding out not only the language of the person, but also if there's a particular dialect or two within that language that's very meaningful to you.
And I think sometimes maybe spouses won't even know what the dialect is until they're in the process of expressing or receiving it, that they'll go, you know what, I appreciate what you did, but that really did not fill my love tank. So maybe it's this. And then they do that and you're like, yes, that's exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah, that's right.
Here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, so one of the gifts, the love languages that you mentioned in the book, and I struggled with, was gifts, because I remember, aren't we told that, money can't buy love? And so but maybe we can rent love. Is that what we're saying? Like, right?
No, you can't buy love. It's just that for some people, receiving a gift makes them super feel loved, just like words of affirmation might make another person feel loved. And so don't accuse them of being materialistic. Well, you're just materialistic.
Right.
You think things are going to make you happy. It's not the thing. It's the fact that you were thinking about them when you were apart, and you got something that you wanted to give them. And that's what communicates to them. And if your number 5 is gifts, it's going to be hard for a person to even understand how anyone could have that as number 1. But some people do. Now, not as many people have that as the others, but gifts is typically number 5 in terms of the number of people. I think, if I'm remembering, it's about 40% of people, words of affirmation is their primary language. And then 30% is acts of service. And I think I can't remember now the others, but anyway, it's the quality time, and then gifts and physical touch, and then gifts is last. But so it just means that this makes them feel loved. So you have to accept that reality, even though you can understand how that would mean anything to anybody.
Well, and I don't want to go down a rabbit trail here, but I know this applies to all relationships, right? It applies to children, parents, even at work. Right? That's true.
Yeah.
Languages, yeah. Notice we've got 3 boys, and their love languages are all different. And our youngest, his primary love language is gifts, and it drives his brothers nuts because it's like, well, I didn't get anything, but you don't value that stuff. Why would you? It's just trying to again remind them, okay, but this is primarily how this kid wants to receive love. And so again, I'm not buying them a car, and if I am, it's a Hot Wheel. But it's trying to use that language and dialect appropriately. So I think that's really helpful for parents or anyone who's listening going, I wonder if this applies to all areas of life. The answer is definitively yes.
Yes, that's true. Now, I would say this for parents, that please don't hear me saying that you only speak your child's primary love language. No, you give heavy doses of the primary, but you speak the other 4, because we would like the child to grow up knowing how to receive love in all 5 languages, and later how to give love in all 5 languages. That's the healthiest adult. See, most of us came to adulthood, and some of these languages we did not receive as a child. And so we don't know how to speak them. And we can learn, but it's hard for it. It takes effort for us to learn how to do that, because we didn't receive. If you didn't receive words of affirmation growing up, for example, you don't feel comfortable saying things like that to other people. So I think that's important for parents. The book that parallels that was The 5 Love Languages of Children, which came out after I wrote that original book, and then later The 5 Love Languages of Teenagers, because I had people say, well, Dr. Chapman, we read your book on children. It really, really helped. But now they're teenagers, and it doesn't seem to be working. Yeah. Does their love language change? And I said, I don't think their love language changes, but you have to use new dialects of their language. When they were little, if physical touch is their language, you could do it, hug them, go out on the ball field and hug them, after the game. You do that for a teenager, they're going to push you away. Oh, don't do that. That's kid stuff. So, you see, they now feel like what you've been doing is childish. They're older now. You have to learn new ways of expressing that primary love language.
That's really helpful. Well, and that takes me to another question I've thought of. I mean, what about adults? Do adults' love languages change? And here's why I asked that question. Once we discovered our primary and our backup love languages, from my spouse, it was quality time, and so what I noticed was quality time and physical touch were two primary and backup. But over time, she says, well, gifts are actually kind of important to me now. Building me up, that actually does fill my love tank. So did those love languages change, or what's happened?
I don't know that if it has become her primary language, it would be a shift. Most of the time, we tend to keep our primary throughout a lifetime. However, at certain seasons of life, other love languages tend to jump to the top. For example, acts of service may not be a spouse's love language, but a mother that has 2 preschool children, acts of service is probably going to jump to the top because she's overwhelmed, And here's the other thing. When you're getting a good supply of your primary language, the other language is just like, cherry on top of the soda. Yeah, and so the others do become more meaningful because now you know that there are 5 ways, and that's another way, and your love tank is full. But man, that gift is the cherry on top.
So when a spouse is actually meeting those needs effectively, theoretically, those other ones will begin to rise, and then you can actually serve them better, which actually helps you become a more rounded person.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I sometimes suggest to couples to keep this on the front burner. About every 3 weeks, just say to your spouse, honey, on a scale of 0 to 10, how full is your love tank? And they give you a reading. If they say anything less than 10, you say, well, this week, what could I do that would be most helpful? And what they say may not be their primary language that week. It's something else that's really pressing them that would be more meaningful on that particular week. But at least now you know what would be most meaningful that week. So just checking in with each other like that every 3 weeks or so can really keep this on the front burner.
And I think it's really, that's a tool I use in marriage and parenting. I'll ask my kids, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how am I doing as your dad? And what can I do?
Yeah.
Even here at the church, we use that for outreach and ministry in general. But one thing I will encourage, and I know you would do this too, if you ask that question, be prepared to receive that information. Because sometimes, my default is I can be defensive, and it's like my wife will say, "But you asked for the information." Really, I was just looking for lots of information. So be prepared to receive if you ask. Right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So my wife and I just wrapped up teaching a 6-week marriage class here at the church, and it was fascinating. We actually talked through the 5 love languages at different points, and one of the things this guy kept saying is, "Well, it's obvious that." Physical touch is my primary love language, but all he was talking about was sex.
Yeah.
Sex drive is not the same as physical touch in the love language, right?
No, and I think a lot of men assume that. When I share it, often men they're saying to themselves, "I know my language, physical touch." And I say, well, maybe that is your language, but let me ask you a question: do non-sexual touches make you feel loved? First of all, they look at me like a deer in the headlights. Well, are there non-sexual touches? Yeah. I said, okay, let's say the two of you get out of the car, you're walking into a shopping mall, and as you walk in, your wife reaches over and holds your hand. Does that make you feel loved? And if he says, no, that kind of irritates me. I said, okay, let's say she's pouring you a cup of coffee, and she puts her hand on your shoulder. Does that make you feel loved? And if he says, no, not really. I said, physical touch is not your love language. You like sex. I get that, I get that. That's a whole different thing. But don't assume that all men have physical touch, because certainly the sexual experience is, the height of physical touch, as it were. But that don't assume that all men have physical touch is their primary language.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful for people to understand the difference. That's really good. So last question for you is this. how do you do this in a way that doesn't seem like you're coercing a spouse into receiving and giving, a love language?
Yeah.
As you're a marriage counselor, I do marriage counseling here at the church. You get people who come in and they do want their marriage to get better, but they do it in order to receive it back. And the reality is marriage, your primary goal is to pursue that person's good, not your own flourishing, but theoretically it comes with it. So how do you coach a couple or a person who wants to love well without expecting it back in return? Because
Yeah. Well, I've sometimes said to people, someone will say to me, Dr. Chapman, I read your book and I've been speaking my wife's love language now for 3 weeks and nothing's happening. She's just not responding to me. I said, so let me understand. You're saying that you're speaking her love language so that she'll speak your language. Well, yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. I said, that's called manipulation, not love. We're to love our spouse, the Bible says, men, we're to love our spouse, our wives, like Christ loved the church. Remember, he loved us while we were dirty, rotten sinners. We weren't loving him. He's our model. And this is why Christians have it on non-Christians. We have outside help.
Yeah.
Because the Bible says, Romans 5:5, the love of God is poured into our hearts by the Holy Spirit.
Wow.
So as Christians, I think we all need to say, Lord, you know my spouse. You know how they're treating me. I don't feel a lot of love coming from them, but I know you love them. So I'm opening my heart and asking you to pour your love in my heart, and I'll be your agent for loving them. And you're not motivated because you have feeling loves for them. You're motivated because as a Christian, God loves them, and you're the one that can be his best husband to them,
Right.
And so we reach out. Just like God reaches out to us, he reaches out to everybody. But many people just spit in God's face, So, but here's the thing. Speaking love to a spouse that you don't feel any love coming from them is the most powerful way to influence them down the line, not overnight, down the line, to begin to respond to you. I sometimes give spouses in those kind of marriages a 6-month challenge. I say, would you be willing, with the help of God, to express your spouse's primary love language, let's just say even once a week for 6 months? And let's just see what happens. And almost always, before the 6 months is over, that spouse has begun to warm up. That spouse has begun to reach out to them. Say, well, what can I do to help you? And so love stimulates love. Now, as again, we can't make the spouse love us. And yes, there are people that'll walk away even when you're loving them in their right love language, because many times they've got somebody else. They're relating to somebody else already, and you don't know that yet.
Yeah.
But typically, they respond to unconditional love over a long period of time.
That's so good. Yeah. We have been given God's love so freely and bountifully. We have an obligation, but it's also a privilege to share that same love with our spouse or anyone, because he first loved us. Such good words, Dr. Chapman. Again, I can't begin to thank you enough, of course, for your time today, but for your work. I mean, Tiffany and I are true products and children of applying this, and we are forever grateful to you and for your work. And I know the people who watch and listen to this podcast will be touched as well. If people want to learn more about you, to get some of your great resources, that you have a free assessment, I know, on your website, where do they go to learn more about you and get some of these great tools?
They can go to 5lovelanguages.com, the number 5lovelanguages.com. In fact, my publisher that runs that website told me 137 million people have taken the free quiz on love languages. And there's a quiz there for married couples. There's a quiz for single adults. There's a quiz for teenagers. And you can also take a quiz on your apology language, which is another book I wrote, 5 Languages of Apology, because we have different ideas on what it means to apologize. So a lot of help at that website. Yeah.
That's incredible. Well, the good thing is, for all my listeners today and those watching, I think we've got at least 3 more podcasts coming to cover at least 3 more books. So I'm those. Your one on teenagers is one that's on my to read list this summer, because I've got 2 teenagers right now, and one I am absolutely baffled by. I have no whatsoever. And now I got you on speed dial. I may call you up for backup, but I'll read. So, Dr. Chapman, I cannot, again, begin to thank you enough for your time today and for spending time with us on the Faith in Real Life podcast.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you again. And keep up the good work you're doing. Sounds exciting. God bless.
Likewise, brother. Thank you. Have a great day. God.
Thanks for joining us on the Faith in Real Life podcast. If you want to stay up to date on the latest content from Stand Firm Ministries, go to natcrawford.com and follow Nat Crawford on all social platforms, including YouTube, and Dan Koch on Facebook. And please remember to share this podcast if you enjoy it, and while you're at it, give us a 5-star rating. Until next time, remember to stand firm in the faith and stand on God's word.